A few questions for you this morning. Are there blind in the world? Are there people who suffer the inability to see? Are there lame among us? Those who struggle with the ability to walk? Are there leper colonies and lepers in the world who suffer skin diseases, who suffer not belonging to the greater community of the world because of the way they appear? Are those among us that suffer the inability to listen, to hear, and suffer deafness? Are those among us that suffer death? Are there those among us that suffer poverty? In truth, we see the suffering and the plight of men and women around the world if we open up our eyes for a moment, if we open up our hearts to be concerned for our neighbor. We will see suffering in our midst. It is the same suffering that happened 2,000 years ago in the very community that Jesus lived and had his public ministry. And we as followers of Jesus Christ are called to go out to meet human suffering. As St. John Paul II said in his letter to the youth of the world before he died, on February 22nd, 2004, he said, "Go out to meet human suffering with the compassion of Christ." My brothers and sisters, we cannot meet human suffering with compassion unless we have Christ in his heart, because we become the very channels of his compassion. Because we do not have the capacity to enter deeply within the suffering of another. Compassion. It comes from the Latin root cum and patio. Patio meaning to suffer. Cum, to suffer with. We may not experience blindness. We may have perfect hearing. Some of us may be losing our hearing. Some of us may have selective hearing. We may not be suffering that. We may be young, and we don't even consider the memento mori, to remember our death. Death is not even there for us in our minds yet. This is a problem of modernity, by the way. You laugh, but it is not funny. Side story. I got to share a side story because you made me remember it. Well, I don't know if I could share this story. Never mind. My brothers and sisters, if we have not suffered something, we cannot enter into another person's suffering. Isn't that true that we experience that in our interactions with one another, with our family members, with our friends, who feel so alone in their suffering that they say, "You don't understand what I am going through." And in truth, we don't. But he does. Because he has gone before us in every type of suffering. And he has the capacity to meet us in our human suffering with authority. And that is what the gospel passage is explaining to us today. Are you the one who is to come, or should we look for another? Who do you look for in your suffering? How many of you turn from your suffering and turn on the TV? How many of you turn from your suffering and turn on your phone and begin to scroll to be stimulated for just a moment of pleasure so that you can escape from your suffering for a single moment? How many of you turn to the cork and screw and pop your sufferings away for a single moment? How many of you turn to the flesh, to the senses, to be able to speak to your suffering for just a moment of escape? If you're human and you're not an alien, you're an alien? Oh my goodness. We have an alien in our midst. If you're human, you have done these things. And they may give you momentary happiness, but they do not give you the consolation to your suffering. They do not alleviate or heal your suffering. Henry Nouwen, the great renowned theologian and priest of the 20th century, who has wrote extensively on many things, wrote on the distinction between happiness and joy. He said, happiness depends on external circumstances appealing to our external senses, right? So if I have Disney Plus to look at, I will be happy. If I have Epic the Band to listen to every day, which I kind of want, personally, then I will be happy. If I could uncork that fine wine and taste of its most beautiful and delectable flavor, I will be happy. If I could smell the aroma of roses that my husband brings me every week, then I will be happy. If my husband would just come home from work and spend a little bit of time on me, because I have spending all this time with our children, and could just massage my feet, I would be happy. Ew. We know in all of these things of the senses, they will pass away within moments. We have a moment of happiness. We have a moment of pleasure. And then the world of suffering comes crashing in. Day after day, week after week, month after month. So what is going to meet us in our suffering? Even if a fine wine that has such a great finish remains on the palate a little bit longer than Gallo wine or Woodbridge, or my grandfather's favorite, Carlo Rossi. We know, my brothers and sisters, that the world has nothing within it that can appeal to the deepest hunger of our hearts. The hunger internally, past the external senses, past the external world. We have a capacity within us to be met by God Himself. In His compassion, God became man And he dwelt among us in the limitations of human flesh and dwelt among us in human suffering. There is absolutely nothing that Jesus cannot meet you in to give you consolation and sure support, to give you his healing mercy, and to reconcile you to the greater truth that you are worth it and that you are made for God and God alone. So many times we place expectations in the world and expectations on our relationships, expectations on our spouses, our parents, our children, to behave the way that we want them to so that I can be happy. This is not happiness. You are meant for more. You are meant for joy, a joy that surpasses anything of this world, a joy that only God can give. And that is what you're made for. That is what God truly desires for you to experience his joy. Joy never leaves us because it is rooted in eternity. And joy is a taste that is finer than any wine because the finish is eternal. My brothers and sisters, as we gather on this occasion of Gaudete Sunday, we must rejoice as a people. So if we find ourselves in a desert experience, if we find ourselves arid and dry to the very bone, to the very core of where we are, if we are so unhappy in our marriages, unhappy in our homes, we feel empty and alone and broken, rejoice and be glad, and listen to the prophet of Isaiah, who speaks to us this weekend and departs from the mountain to the very desert that he explains. And he says, in this parched land, in this dry and arid place, I will make a flourishing spring come up. And I will provide for you an abundance of flowers, to show that my hand can do all things. For nothing is impossible for God. Do you believe that? Lord, I believe. Help my unbelief. Because if we truly believed that, it would be seen. It would be seen in a world that is starving in its poverty to be met by Christ. So again, we know that there is poverty among us, and perhaps the poverty is within us. But my friends, let us take this opportunity on this day to express our poverty to Jesus. And may he continue this good work that was explained to John the Baptist in the gospel today. May he heal us. May he restore us. And may he give us the taste of joy that remains with us forever. Amen.